Hello and welcome to episode 10 of The Hex with myself, Armand Kafai, John Arnold. We've reached double digits, and John, welcome back to Dallas.
Nice to be back. Had a good trip in Oaxaca. Not a lot of soccer. My Oaxaca report, if you want to know about the soccer, is more of a baseball town. And actually, I was told that in the Pueblitos, a little city around Oaxaca, that a lot of the kids are playing basketball. But I will say, not a lot of height among the Oaxacan people. So don't know if we'll see the next Wemby from there, but it was a good time. Good food,
Maybe the
bad
next
basketball.
Juan Toscano Anderson.
I mean, even that seems optimistic, but hey, we'll see in 20 years.
Wimbito, perhaps somewhere around,
Victor, yeah, sure.
and your son didn't catch any games on the courts out there.
Nah, I think he would have been a high exceller. But no, he was driven around by a child on a four-wheeler in a ranch area. But yeah, no hoops games, no kick arounds, and baseball season's over. So it was not a sporting trip, but sometimes it's good to get away. And I was able to catch most of the Liguilla as well. So
I was jealous. It looked awesome. Well, there is plenty of Liguilla, plenty of MLS Cup to get into, guys. So let's get into the top six topics of the week on the Hex. In the MLS playoffs starting out in the Western Conference, John, you were the only one of us to correctly pick an MLS Cup member, the LA Galaxy. They defeated the Seattle Sounders 1-0, advancing to their first MLS Cup since 2014. A really big achievement for the Galaxy, and they've been overshadowed a lot by LAFC over the last 5 years, and the LA Galaxy are back in the MLS Cup final for the first time in 10 years. Armand, plenty of credit to go around, but where are you kind of seeing the biggest credit here for the LA Galaxy?
I think it's quite clear. It's Will Kuntz.
Mm.
Will Kuntz straight up built this roster. He came from LAFC. I think people seem to forget that he came from LAFC. Has plenty of experience within sport. Worked at the league office, worked in baseball as well too, and brought those knowledge, brought that talent to the LA Galaxy. And what does he do? He brings in Gabriel Peck. He brings in Joseph Paintsel. He I don't think it was a part of the Ricky Puig acquisition, but he built the pieces around there. So if you look, Will Kuntz, and again, that's the importance of having guys that understand the league at a deeper level. You're seeing a lot of these in MLS front offices where MLS front offices are dominated by people who worked in MLS in the league office. They know the rules, they know how to exploit them, they know how to manipulate them in certain ways. And for Will Kuntz, he's just brought a level of, I guess, excellence to this team because the triple P's have been excellent. Joveljic has stepped it up. You look around the back line, you look at John McCarthy that they brought in. You can go on and on, but John, for me, Will Kuntz just deserves a boatload of credit for just how he's almost rebuilt this Galaxy in one offseason.
well, I don't even think it's almost. I mean, when you talk about the big pieces that came in, I think Puig being who he was and the fact that they were saying we got to build around this guy, although it probably didn't take too much technical acumen to figure that out when you watch the team. He's such a big piece. And unfortunately, obviously for him, for the Galaxy, he's not going to be involved in the final because of that ACL issue, but was so important. But the fact that Paintsel and Peck not only to me were brought in, but the fact that they come from different continents, from very different backgrounds, and yet it just meshed. Even the language, I was able to do the story for MLS Soccer about that trident, that attacking trio, and I did the interview with Puig in Spanish, Paintsel in English, and Peck. We had a translator for Portuguese, and it's like, man, these guys probably do not really understand each other super well when they're talking about anything that isn't exactly what's happening on the field. And yet on the field, the chemistry and the understanding is quite clear, not just between that trident, but some of the other pieces as well. A new goalkeeper that comes in, like you're saying, this squad is built really well. I'm gonna give a little bit of love to a guy I feel like was maligned, and that's Greg Vanney.
Yep. Yep.
Daniel, I think people talked a lot of trash about Vanney, not just at LA, but
Yeah.
also, well, yeah, I mean, sure, but and somewhat merited, right? Last year was bad, and this is a club that has this big history, this rich history. So I think Kuntz, yes, ownership, yes, for making these moves. But also Vanney for putting it all together because it is a very disparate group. And when I was speaking with him about how he sort of approaches player management, it struck me that he's at a very high level when it comes to sort of trying to manage the human being and the player, and sort of making sure that competitive drive is there, making sure the human being off the field is happy so they can excel on the field. I've come away really impressed, and I don't think tactically he's made that many missteps as well. We could talk about maybe the last week, but the seeding didn't end up hurting them that much. They're going to host MLS Cup. They've got a good chance to lift the trophy, and if they don't win MLS Cup, sure, maybe it's because of a technical issue or a tactical issue, but ultimately, I think if they don't lift the trophy, we'll be talking about it being because their most important player is injured.
And that's you mentioned Greg Vanney, and that's what I had in my notes, was that this is somewhat of a legacy playoffs for Greg Vanney, in the sense of, you look at his career, and this is a guy who's coached hundreds of games in the league now. I see it as over 400 games. But the case could be made that when he was very successful at Toronto FC, that was a different MLS. That was an MLS where you can just have two or three good players. And it was a very weak Eastern Conference back then. You know, he made the playoffs. Obviously, he did what he needed to do. But there is an alternate universe where they start out slow this year, the Galaxy, and Greg Vanney's gone. Like, I don't think his job was absolutely safe going into the season. And so to do this, I'm happy for him, because as you said, he does seem like a genuinely good guy and a really just good manager. And I think you brought up an underrated point, is being able to bring in a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds. It's somewhat different than the Red Bulls, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But and you didn't even mention Joveljic, a Serbian, right? Like, there's players from almost every continent. I mean, if you think about it, and you've got two Japanese players on the back line. So he's taking players from all shapes, walks of life into this team. And then we talk about, Armand, you gave the flowers to Will Kuntz, two players that we knew in Dallas very well that I think we all wrote off, Edwin Cerrillo and John Nelson. They're starting pieces on an MLS Cup team.
Those
the
role
John
player
Nelson part's
guys,
wild.
yeah, I mean, those role player guys have been really good, right? And I do think there's something to be said for playing around. I think a guy like Ricky Puig just makes everyone better. We saw in the Colorado series how Nelson was able to combine with him, but not just with him, right? And I think the kind of rising tide lifts all boats, and winning, solves a lot of issues. I feel like the other group that I think gets credit for the Galaxy turnaround is the fans. Because remember, last year, the fans are the ones who said, if you guys don't change your chief soccer officer, we're not going to show up. And they didn't. And they boycotted. And then we finally see change. Chris Klein's not the only guy who didn't have success leading LA Galaxy during this decade-long drought that could be extended. They might not win MLS Cup, but still, it looks like things are definitely going in the right direction. There's talented people like Dennis Ticlosa, who's gone on to success elsewhere and had success previously. This is not an easy job. And so, Armand, I think your shout of Will Kuntz and the fact that, him coming in and having control is very important, but I don't think that happens at a club like, I'm not going to throw strays, but at many other clubs around the league where the supporters groups are either not as organized, not as vocal, or not as listened to, because the Galaxy, to their credit, despite the fact that, you can say whatever you want about the ownership, they did listen in this case. We finally saw changes, and that's where the turnaround comes from.
You worry about the fans that don't care. You don't worry about the fans that complain. When they complain, that means they still care, right? And real quick, Armand, we'll talk about this a little more in our predictions, but for the Galaxy now, with Ricky Puig out, is it going to be the Marco Reus show? How do they kind of rebuild this thing in a one-off game against a Red Bulls team we'll talk about in a moment that is incredibly solid defensively?
Well, it's almost actually, I will say it's impossible to replace Ricky Puig and what he's done.
He had twice as many passes as any other player in the game on Saturday.
His usage rate is almost like unheard of, especially for a player playing two ways to a degree. It's almost James Harden-esque back.
I was going to say, I almost brought you offside there for a second.
Yeah. But
no free throws though.
Yeah, no, he's an ethical player.
He is an ethical baller.
But when you look, it's going to take a collective effort, right? It's going to take guys like, I'm assuming you might see Mark Delgado slot in. Marco Reus he picked up a.
Can they move him centrally? Can they move Reus central? Do you think, for this one?
Well, he has played centrally in those.
Yeah. When he was 10 years younger.
So that's what I'm assuming that they'll do. But Reus had a groin injury and was subbed off in that Seattle match where Vanney was talking about today how he's kind of working through it, and they hope to see him in the game and that he's trending positively. Inspiring. But we'll see. Guys like
Fagundes is also a guy who can jump in, right? Like he's a guy who yeah, he's certainly not at Ricky Puig's level, but can do some of the same things where if Royce isn't healthy, or if you say we need more attacking flair than Mark Delgado has, he's an option.
100%. And for this team, though, it's going to be a tall task to almost alter the way you play ball through this ball dominant player and Ricky Puig, who's dynamic offensive and progressing the ball against a team like the Red Bulls, who are a team that have found their identity late on and are consistent in that identity. So it's going to be a fascinating to watch.
Speaking of the Red Bulls, through to MLS Cup for the first time since 2008, which I believe that game was played in LA, was it not? Did the Red Bulls not play that MLS
They were
Cup
the Western Conference champions.
They were the Western Conference champions, and I believe the game was in Los Angeles, and they lost to Columbus, I believe. So the Juan Pablo Angel wow. Red Bulls, right?
Those are some weird days where an Eastern Conference team could win the West, and the MLS Cup was at a neutral site. Well, I know Daniel, you and I went to at least one neutral site MLS Cup.
Yeah, Toronto.
It was weird.
Where the Rapids won the Eastern Conference.
That's right. Yeah,
that's exactly right.
What are they going to do next? 3-game playoff series? But anyways, Red Bulls, Eastern Conference champions, first time ever, and first time in MLS Cup since 2008. They defeated Orlando City. Armand, we both called this one on the show last week. We both said we thought the Red Bulls would beat Orlando, despite my heart wanting to Orlando to win. I mean, this was the most likely result in the end, right? A 1-0 decided on a set piece.
Yes, and it was kind of an ugly game from what I watched.
It was.
I'm being nice, okay? We gotta be a little bit nice. It's a playoff game. It was pretty ugly until the end. I mean, Orlando created some chances late on during the match, and that was because Red Bull was sitting back absorbing. But for the Red Bulls, I mean, don't forget, they're like the head of Red Bull soccer was basically
Jurgen
like,
Klopp?
yeah.
No, that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, I was like, where's he going with this?
It wasn't Jurgen Klopp, because I don't think it was higher at the time, but they said that, hey, this Red Bull project in New York isn't working out for us. And now we're looking a couple months removed from that quote with them in MLS Cup. And look, Daniel,
but what is the point of the project? I think that needs to be put into context.
Exactly.
What is the point of the Red Bull project? Is it to win MLS Cup, or is it to develop players or make money?
Like to win the UEFA Champions League for a team in Germany, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, for them, they were compact. They did the things they needed to do. They made it ugly, and they made it a Red Bull game to the end. And I mean, kudos to Sandro Schwartz, right? Like, he came in this year, and now he's figured out ways to win games. And that's something that we compliment coaches quite a bit on. How can you win games in MLS Cup? Doesn't matter, or MLS Cup playoffs. Doesn't matter how pretty they are. It doesn't matter if it's super nice or ugly. You got to win the games. And John, for me, they've been just consistent in winning those kind of games. Even their win against New York City FC wasn't the prettiest at the end, but they got the job done.
And I think a key piece in that is, if you're going to win ugly, especially if you're going to win, maybe without scoring a lot, Carlos Cornell's been great. He's had an amazing playoffs, and I don't feel like people have really talked about
3
him.
shutouts in 4 games.
And shootout victory, right? This is a huge piece, and he's a guy who kind of bounced around a little bit. His first MLS experience, if I'm not mistaken, was in Philly as like the backup, I think.
Yep.
And then he gets kind of not naturalized because he was eligible, but he becomes the Paraguay #1. They beat Argentina. Like, what a crazy month for him. But he's been great. He's been really, really good as the goalkeeper. And I think that kind of base allows you to play in sort of a way that they do. And if you're going to try and ugly up another game, whether or not that's the approach with Puig, he's a guy who you can sort of rely on if you need to do that to make a couple of saves, because I don't think we're going to see, and God, please don't make it this way, a Seattle Sounders Toronto FC sort of game where it's 0 shots. And I think we'll see shots. I think the Galaxy will try and attack even with Puig injured, but Cornell's the kind of guy who might be able to keep him out. So for me, he's a pretty fundamental piece to what the Red Bulls want to do. And I don't know that people have really been looking hard enough at kind of the difference that he's made.
Yeah, and what I wanted to point out is that the Red Bulls, though, one of the things to really watch here from a national team perspective is they are led by three young Americans and Daniel Edelman, a midfielder who has been fantastic in the playoffs. He's played every minute of the playoffs. He's 21 years old. He led them in minutes this year. And this is a Red Bulls team that has a big history of producing central midfielders that make it onto the national team stage. And then you have John Tolkien, who right now, okay, the U.S. is kind of flush at outside back, but you have to be wondering, is Pochettino, okay, you shake your head a little bit, but there's a lot of options there at the moment. But you wonder, I think it's going to be very interesting to see, how does Pochettino rate these moments that these players are getting right now in the playoffs?
And will we see that reflected in the January camp call for that, the Miami camp that they're going to do, the game against Venezuela? I definitely think that, if they want to be there, they can probably be there. It is a great, I think, I'll say great talent developing team. And even if the project, like you're referencing, Armand, hasn't necessarily given Red Bull Soccer what they want, this run, I think, gives them plenty to think about, because clearly they can do some of the, the right things. They can make some of the things happen that can result in a league like MLS with playoffs, potentially winning this trophy, because I don't think any of us are counting them out there's two teams left. One of them's going to win.
And Armand, did you come away from that match being as disappointed in Orlando's approach as I did? Because I was, again, disappointed. I didn't think they came out. I thought they came out a little scared, and I thought they came out trying to keep the game too compact. And they played into exactly what New York wanted to do. When I think if Orlando wanted to win this game, it needed to be pretty wide open, and they kept it too compact. And it's really disappointing for me as a guy. We all root for Oscar Pereja, and it's kind of another, like, always the bridesmaid, never the bride moment.
Yeah, for Red Bulls, they have such an interesting trait in that they just turn the games into the games that they want to play, right? With their pressing, with how they.
But when you're at home in front of a full crowd,
exactly,
out,
but
you have all these attacking players.
But that's what Red Bull does. But that's what Red Bull does. They force you to play in a way that's uncomfortable, and that's something that the Galaxy are going to have to try to wiggle out of, especially without Ricky Puig. Look, they press you. They're going to foul you. They're going to force you to try to play direct. They're going to force you to do all these things. And for Red Bulls, that's what you want. And in Orlando's situation, I mean, I'll be honest, it's pretty disappointing for them to not be an MLS Cup because of where their situation
golden
was.
Opportunity.
They had the golden you're not going to get this opportunity again.
It's
Columbus
just hard to, hard. I mean, Columbus,
Miami,
right? Like, yeah. I think it's hard to see. And even if one or two of those teams disappoint,
NYCFC,
Charlotte, like some of the other projects that are smart that people are putting together, the manager hires that you may like or
Atlanta.
dislike. Yeah. Even, what is it? Yeah, exactly. I think there's just so many other teams that are kind of in reload mode. It's really difficult to see them getting a better opportunity. Now, maybe you say, we embrace that challenge. We're going to beat those teams. This was the year for Orlando.
So it hasn't been a great playoffs for MLS in terms of the buzz, guys. And we've talked about the format. Maybe that has something to do with it. These games had very few attacking chances. I saw no team got above even one expected goal in the matches. And they also took place against some other huge sporting events, family stuff going on, people go on vacation around Thanksgiving week. John, it didn't really seem the MLS playoffs have hit it out of the park this year.
No, I do. Other than the articles that I've written for MLSsoccer.com, of course, I do feel like people have not been as locked in as usual. As a joke, I know people aren't locked in necessarily and everything, right? Okay. I thought I'd get at least one laugh.
Right.
No, I definitely think that there's a number of different things that have kind of made it difficult. In theory, this game should be one that's sort of easy to sell. It's New York versus LA. Yeah, we just had the World Series, which was New York versus LA. It's clearly the two biggest markets in the US, but at the same time, I think that the Red Bulls coming out of kind of nowhere, not even being maybe the fancied team in their own region this time around, makes it sort of unexpected, and maybe people haven't had time to think about some of the narratives that are interesting. New York, LA, and maybe back to the glory days of Henry or Juan Pablo Angel, and I don't know that people have had time to sort of register and think about that. I definitely think that that's it's struggled for buzz. And I think to me, it's another argument in favor of potentially switching the calendar because
Yeah,
I feel
that's
like with your
yep.
maybe if you try and work around this international break in a more clever way, it's possible that something could pop where this would be more relevant. But it does feel like if this were happening in May instead of November, you're not dealing with the holidays, you're not dealing with college football ending, you're not dealing with the NFL, which is
Nice
always
weather.
going to be a huge. The weather's nice, people want to go to games. I do wonder if that's kind of another point in favor. Armand, I'm not sure it's going to happen, but to me, you got to kind of find a way to get out of this cluster of not just other sporting events, but real life things happening. And it feels like it's just a very busy time that people's attention is very split.
Saturday night after Thanksgiving, like everyone is doing something, right?
And
Oh, the movies.
Yeah.
and when
See
you
old friends.
But for real though, you're going up
Yeah.
against a bunch of big movies came out last. Like people were literally talking about that at the places I was at. Should we go to Moana? Should we go to, Wicked? Like that's a thing.
Yeah. No, you're right.
it's
Moana's
it's
out. That's been out for years.
it's
Two.
tough,
Moana
like
two.
because like you said, like you guys said, there's so much stuff going on, and also these playoffs, like they're just, to be honest, look, they've kind of dragged on. Like
Well,
Yeah,
with
for
the
sure.
best of three was what, 3 weeks, and then break, and then or week and a half break. Then you have this. It's too long. There's so much. There's a lot of things going on, like you said. There's so much sports combining that the buzz. I don't
It's also
feel
not
the
intuitive,
buzz.
right? It's not intuitive. And I think that's where, Liga MX maybe has a bit of a leg up because it's sort of intuitive. Every soccer fan understands the aggregate. Yeah, some of the tiebreaker stuff is a little weird, but it starts and it goes, right? They waited until that November break, then it starts. They even cram in that playing around, and then here it is, midweek weekend. My wife does not care at all about soccer. She doesn't care at all about games. She just wants to know what my schedule is. But even, she was able to last night. She was like, hey, you're going to be busy during the week for one or two
exactly.
nights and then on the weekend for 1 or 2 nights. Yes. And I think that's the thing is it's easy for the consumer, the fan that goes to the stadium, the fan that wants to watch to kind of get in and also to kind of catch that wave, right? Where you say, oh, I watched Wednesday. I really want to see what happens
Yes.
Saturday. And MLS, it's been difficult to sort of catch that wave.
And John, let me ask you this. I mean, since you cover Liga MX closer than Daniel and I watch, the games have been much more entertaining in Liguilla.
But
Like you
that's
can
it.
look at it from top to bottom. You like that. What do you think is because of that format, obviously, or what do you think?
I think the format does make teams play in a certain way. I think also you have like there are teams that have clear roles that maybe MLS lacks, where you have kind of a grande like America Cruz Azul is going to play in a certain way because this is what they expect. Whereas Atletico San Luis or Tijuana, they're going to come out and kind of like we see in the college basketball tournament. Duke is going to play in a certain way that Albany's not going to play in. But that makes it fun, is that contrast of styles and these smaller teams saying, this is our only chance to win. We got to do something weird here. In
And when they
MLS, it
win,
does
they
feel
don't wait
like
another week until they play again. It's like they win and then they have another game 2 days
But think
later.
think about that Charlotte Orlando series, right? Charlotte was able to say, we're just gonna ugly this up and try and play for draws and shootouts. And
I
in
mean,
Liga
that's what
MX, that
Seattle
wouldn't
did.
work.
That's what Seattle did the entire playoff run. Just
Wouldn't work.
ugly it up. And if the format was different, you'd have to have Seattle go forward because a draw wouldn't get you there.
I think also the less days between games. Now, it's weird because you don't want to like put teams at a disadvantage, but the fewer days there are between games, the more chance there is for chaos because the teams have less time to game plan for one another and the teams have less time to practice. And you look at like, for instance, and we'll talk about the actual results and the Liguilla shortly, but you have Tijuana beating Cruz Azul 3-0 on Wednesday, and then they play again on Saturday. And it's so quick. It's so instant gratification. It's so, oh, okay, 72 hours later, we have another game. Versus, okay, well, we had this game, I think it was Friday this week, and then maybe it's like Sunday next week. And then the third game is maybe on like Saturday night, the week after that. In Liga MX, it's like Wednesday, Saturday, Thursday, Sunday. Wednesday, you know when the games are, and it makes it easy to watch.
Commercially, it's also the benefit of being the biggest person in the room. I don't know how to being the biggest show in the country because you have the confidence and sort of bravado to say, yeah, why wouldn't we be on Saturday night at 10 p.m. I applaud MLS for kind of trying to work around some of that. But again, I think it'd be easier if they weren't in this exact time slot, because then if you say it's Saturday at 10 and there's an NBA regular season is the only thing going on in the sports calendar, it's going to be easier for people to tune in and get excited.
Speaking of commercially in Liga MX, some really interesting news. I don't want to say, John, that it broke this week, but at least it resurfaced this week as you shake your head, that Liga MX has agreed to an investment with a private equity firm, along with kind of the big headline from an American standpoint being the NFL involved with it, to potentially take some ownership in Liga MX and commercial rights. So
Yeah,
John, tell us a little bit more about this and if you think it's a good thing. And I know you're writing about it as well.
Yeah, it's not done yet, first of all. What we had last week was Juan Carlos Rodriguez, the president of the Mexican Federation, notably former TV exec,
Hmm.
writing to the club owners and saying, hey, this is something we're going to be talking about in the meetings that'll take place after the season. The ownership meetings should probably be longer, but they often are this sort of blitz of all the league's owners getting together at one fancy hotel. They used to stay, now it's just one day. So I think this is kind of trying to lay the groundwork for like really serious votes, including this potential that Apollo, this PE firm that also does some other different things with investments and money, taking a chunk of the league is something they've talked about for a really long time. The NFL's involvement is something new. There's a couple other wrinkles as well that also kind of deal with the US market. There's Leagues Cup 2.0 is sort of nodded at. There's a couple other things that are in these letters that have gone out to ownership groups. Overall,
How does this affect though, like the general fan? Like what could we potentially see here?
I mean, that's the thing, is that we don't really know. But what this could clear the way for is for Liga MX to market itself and move as a commercial product in a way it never has before. One of the biggest issues for Liga MX when we talk about growth abroad is that each team gets their own broadcast deal. They put their own rights deals in place. They do their own corporate sponsorships down there. You're on the business side and you know that that can be absolute chaos. Whereas if you're trying to sell a product like MLS does, or like Liga, the Premier League or Serie A, they're able to go to whatever country they want to, go to that broadcaster and say, hey, here's our inventory. We'll give you everything. And that also allows the fan to have an experience like they do with Paramount Plus watching Serie
Right.
A, or the
Right.
NBC family watching the Premier League. Then this could be huge, because one of the biggest issues, I think, for the foreign Liga MX fan is figuring out how the heck to actually watch these games. This team's on, this team's not. This is in my language, this isn't. But the potential that this has to sort of actually bring everything together could be pretty big for Liga MX, not just in the US and Mexico, but worldwide.
Well, and that's what's so crazy is as an American English speaking fan who is watching Liguilla and I want to watch it. I can watch the English League One in English easier than I can watch Liga MX, which is the most viewed soccer league in the United States in English. I cannot really watch it in English. Sometimes Fox Sports shows some games and it's really
Save us as in
half-assed.
English on the app. Yeah.
Right. It's like and it's not in HD or at least it's a much no, but it's a much lower picture quality than what you see on like 2DN, different things. And yes, if they can get that and build it up, and I mean, hopefully this would benefit you from a certain perspective. You need to talk to the people at Apollo, but I'm seeing that they're looking at 20% of the non-Mexican media rights. So basically, the stuff in Mexico kind of stays in Mexico, but they want this for the next 50 years. And it seems like it's kind of similar to how some took over the World Cup rights in 2002, and it basically kept MLS alive. Armand, we've both been with John to Liga MX games in Mexico. It feels like the marketing has never quite hit from a non-Mexican fan, and this may be a step in that direction.
And Daniel, to your point, another thing is we could watch MLS in Spanish very easily.
That's
Very
true.
easily.
That's
Like
true.
you just go click a couple buttons and it's there. It
And
looks
it's
like
and it's well-known commentators too.
exactly. It's foreign players like Diego Valeri, like who
Jesus
MLS fans
Bracamontes,
know.
right? Or wait, who? Like a lot of people that I know from like
Yeah,
former TUDN broadcasts.
yeah, and the thing is with this, it seems like Liga MX is taking lessons learned from MLS, like we talked about in previous episodes, where with the Leagues Cup, with other ideas, and to make this more of a global league, they need to take those steps. I think, John, in the report that I read, that they plan on, I guess, reorganizing or the pyramid in some element, in some degree. Is that
Yeah,
is it?
I'm not sure. I mean, we just don't know. There's a lot that we don't know that we're still trying to work out. In Mexican soccer, it's always moving in rumors and et cetera. But I do think that one of the most critical changes, and they actually tried this in the second division, but one of the most critical changes and one of the reasons that Mexican soccer continues to sort of lag behind some of its competitors, and I think is losing ground to leagues like Major League Soccer and some of the other leagues in the Americas, is the second division is a mess. If this deal can help fix the second division, can make the country kind of more, I was joking about Oaxaca earlier. They have a club. They're not good. And it is like in this league where it's not sure if it wants to be a reserve league, if it wants to be a true second division. There's a scandal where some of the players, were accused of sketchy betting and stuff that there's just a lot going on. If this deal can fix that, that actually trickles up to the national team as well. I think there's going to be some backlash. I don't think this will be universally popular. There's a fair amount of owners in Liga MX who I think want things to stay the way that it has been. But I think there's also a number who are starting to look around and saying, if we want to keep surviving, if we want to keep being the dominant league in even Mexico, but certainly in North America, we have to make progressive changes. We have to make smarter business decisions. This cash infusion could be a pretty significant step toward that.
And the NFL owners say, hey, if Liga MX is going to get these games in the United States, which you've been teasing on for a while, they want them in their stadiums, right? Playoff games and a Chivas Club America Clásico.
That's part of the thing that I think is the unstated part of this as well, is if Liga MX is coming into the US for regular season games, potentially for Liguilla matches, everyone's going to need to be singing from the same hymn sheet on both sides of the border. And this kind of seems to make everybody happy if everybody's getting a little cash in their pocket.
Back onto the pitch. Speaking of the Liguilla, guys, some fascinating games this last weekend. As we said earlier, the format just makes for chaos and makes for exciting games. We saw the number 7 seed, Club America, dominate Toluca 4-0 on aggregate. Cruz Azul comes from 3-0 down to beat Tijuana, an 8-goal thriller between Monterrey and Pumas. And John Dominic Torrent has Atletico San Luis in the semifinal. What's the biggest takeaway heading into what should be a really fascinating, well set up semifinals?
It looks awesome, right? You've got
Yeah.
one semifinal that's the Clásico Joven, the two Mexico City clubs who right now are sharing the same stadium, Club America and Cruz Azul, both legs in the Estadio Ciudad de los Deportes. Fingers crossed that the mayor doesn't close down the stadium again.
Open.
Yeah, that we can actually see these matches. And then the other one, you've got this Rayados, this big spending club who actually sort of overly dependent on 3 Spaniards who they've brought in for various amounts of money in the past couple transfer windows, going against the Spaniard himself, although I don't know if he considers himself that, being from Catalonia, Dominic Torrent. Atletico San Luis has this very interesting project that's kind of finally come together under Torrent, where they make a lot of signings that you don't see other Liga MX teams making, whether they're not able to or they're not willing to. San Luis is able to use that Atletico Madrid connection to scout for players and potentially sign players who are not quite at the level of a La Liga giant, but are good enough to help a Liga MX team. Players who are from France, players who are from Brazil, players who are from Uruguay are all contributing right now to this team in a very big way. And you don't really see that very often in Liga MX. And so I think that San Luis has finally been able to leverage that advantage they have in a really interesting way. And Torrent managing things in a smart way. Very often you see managers kind of use the same team between the first leg and second leg, often not change too much up tactically. He made a lot of pretty significant modifications and it paid off. They were able to be attacking and free flowing in the first leg. And once you got a 3-0 advantage, well, you might as well protect it in the second leg. They did just that. Gignac, Mr. Liguilla, has a penalty saved. When that one gets saved, it's like, man, it's just not going to be their day. And he gets past another former MLS manager, Vajko Paunovic, who now people in Monterrey are saying, let's get this guy out of here. He's not good enough. I don't know, Armand. It seemed like an overreaction to me, but at the same time, you had 180 minutes to figure this out. You didn't do it, even though you had the better rosters. So, such is the magic of the Liguilla. But it's been really fascinating to watch. And there have been a lot more goals in Liga MX, Armand, than in MLS, huh?
No, 100%. For me, I was really,
You were
really
blowing us
entertained.
up, Armand. You were blowing us up about these goals. I
Yeah,
mean,
just
you were
I
goal,
locked
know
in.
the
goal,
chat
goal.
was going
Yeah.
in.
Yeah, it
He
was.
works for FOTMob now.
It was super fun. I mean, watching. I elected to watch Pumas Rayados second leg on Sunday. It was like a noon kickoff, and it was just a back and forth affair because you knew that Pumas needed that goal to kind of force that tiebreaker. But Rayados was smashing them on the counter anyway. And in the first leg, you saw Pumas sit back and unfortunately concede a penalty where Sergio Canales converted to give Rayados that 1-0 victory. I thought Pumas played pretty well in that first leg to get away with the 0-0 result, but sometimes it doesn't happen, right? And guys like Chino Huerta, I mean, geez, he was the main focal point, if not the only focal point for Pumas' attack. Just couldn't find anyone else to help contribute to him. And like you said, John, the way that these semifinals are setting up, you have a Clásico on one side, and you have an interesting, different matchup that's just not what you usually see. And for San Luis, they smashed Tigres on Thanksgiving just through quick play up the pitch. And for me, it's just been quite enjoyable to watch. And I mean, that second leg of Pumas Rayados, you just see goal, 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 because of how the teams were attacking it. Because Pumas needed that goal. Okay, Monterrey sit back, smash, and go. For me, the surprise for me would be San Luis.
What about
But
Toluca getting
I was
completely
gonna say,
destroyed?
I mean, expected goals difference doesn't lie, Daniel. We talked about
Yeah.
this, and the expected goal difference of America was quite higher despite their very low standing. For me,
It's also crazy during the year because Toluca was one of the most attacking teams, but I think Andre Jardine, the American manager, outcoached Renato Paiva. We've seen a lot of these stylistic battles, and that was another one where America during the year had sort of uncharacteristic defensive lapses and gaffes, and then they decided to sort of use that defensive base that had gotten them to back-to-back titles in the last two tournaments. They kind of not reinvented, they threw it back to what they were doing before. Paiva and his team weren't ready for it, and they kind of lost their heads in the second leg, despite a really, really great crowd at the Estadio Nemesio Diaz. That's another factor that we probably should underline. I think the Galaxy fans are really good in MLS. Not that anyone's fans have been bad in MLS, but when you look at Toluca and Pumas, two teams that exit, their fan bases are so incredible, so fun to watch.
yeah, we've been there.
The flags, the fireworks, everything that they're doing during the game that just adds that extra element. I think one other thing I'd underline, in a way, it's an argument against parity. Why are we surprised that Atletico San Luis are here? They could be a Red Bulls type team, except we're shocked because they're not supposed to get here. They're a tiny team. And why are we enjoying or able to say, wow, Cruz Azul does it again, America does it again? It's because they have history, they have a legacy. And in MLS, we don't have a lot of teams like that because of parity, because a different team often wins every year. So in some ways, I think those established sort of like traditions do help the fan understand right away, this is the giant, this is the giant killer.
I think it's on MLS in their marketing efforts to identify how can they continue to build that too, and not just from articles from a holistic standpoint, because the narratives are not built, and the only narratives that are built in MLS are built around a Messi or built around someone. What happens when they get knocked out? Actually, there's very interesting narratives around Red Bulls, around Galaxy, beyond Puig, beyond a Messi. Maybe those stories aren't told as much from a holistic standpoint on broadcasts, on different places that I think could benefit, that Liga MX does benefit on. And I want to highlight again, not to beat a dead horse, but the two-leg playoff just makes it so much better because Armand, like you said, Monterrey won 1-0 in the first leg, so Pumas has to come out and attack in the second leg. Well, if Monterrey had won that game 1-0 and then the second leg, this is just a one-off game and it doesn't really matter. They don't have to come out and attack. It doesn't drive the action, and you don't have 48 hours to talk about internally how are they going to approach this second leg. It's just, here's another game. This game happens in a vacuum from this other game, and I think that hurts the playoff product for MLS, and it helps Liga MX.
And I think one of the great examples is Xolos winning 3-0 against Cruz Azul, and Cruz Azul getting the opportunity to, hey, we got to score 3 goals. And if we hit those 3 goals, our seeding is going to take us through, which then rewards the regular season performance.
And the highlights from that game were lit. Okay, like when that first goal went in for Cruz Azul right before halftime, this roar from the crowd was like, okay, we believe now. Like if it goes in at 0-0, it's a tough task. Now it's 1-0. Okay, we need two. Again, if it's that 3-game thing, it's like, okay, great, we're up 1-0. The best thing we can hope for is to go to a third game. Guys, it's prediction time. We love the predictions here. We need to tally these more. Although me and Armand, we had John, I don't know if you caught us on the beach in Oaxaca or in between mezcal tastings, if you caught the Hex last week, but we had the Red Bulls getting through, and we actually both had Seattle, I believe, advancing, which, hey, we were not far off. Like one turnover
No,
by
honestly,
the
I
Roldan
mean,
What do you
brothers.
mean you were
No,
not
no, no,
far
no, no.
off?
One turnover by the Roldan brothers lost that game
yeah,
for Seattle.
I don't think Puig would have lasted in extra time if that game was
No,
extra
and
time.
is your money on Stephen Fry or John McCarthy in a playoff shoot or in a penalty shootout? But
That's
We're
not what
undefeated.
happened.
John is
That's
a
not what
We're
happened.
undefeated in the what if
we're
Yeah,
undefeated in
yeah,
what
oh
if.
yeah. Oh, go.
the hypothetical MLS Cup.
All
What if
right,
Inter
well,
Miami were still in? My pick would be perfect. My bracket would be perfect.
if the games went how I predicted them, my picks would be perfect.
Exactly.
So we're gonna look at Liguilla semifinals and MLS Cup. First off, let's start out with MLS Cup. So the storylines are clear. Can LA figure out a way to play without Ricky Puig and throw Red Bulls for a loop? John, who are you thinking is going to lift the cup on Saturday?
I think they are going to be able to figure out a way. I think Gabriel Peck and Joseph Paintsil and Joveljic, and I think there's still enough of an attacking thrust, even without the conductor, that at some point the instruments, not the instruments, the people playing the instruments know how to play them. They know how to do it. Yeah, it's going to be a huge absence. It really adds an interesting dynamic to this game, although I think everyone would rather have Puig in than not. It's a real shame that he got injured, but I think the Galaxy are going to win 2-0.
Armand,
I think we're going to see a lot different of a game than we usually see from the Galaxy. I don't expect him, I mean, depending on how Marco Reus is feeling, his status, I don't expect him, if he's not in the lineup, I expect him to be a lot more direct with how they play, trying to get Paintsil, Peck isolated on the wings, letting them cook and seeing what happens from there, which could play in the favor of the Red Bulls. The Red Bulls pressing, trying to make it a Red Bull-esque game like we spoke about. I think the Galaxy win in extra time 1-0. I know Vegas, I was looking at the odds, is favoring a over 2.5. I don't know if I don't know if I see that depending on what Marco Reus and with how Red Bull plays and how their defense has, I think they force this extra time. I can see a 1-0 result for the Galaxy. A late goal in extra time seals it, and I'm gonna say it. Gabriel Peck is a hero with a late goal on.
I think, and I'm not just saying this to be contrarian, I think the Red Bulls are going to take this one because if you look at it, they haven't allowed a goal in any of their road games so far. They've played 3 games on the road. They have yet to allow a goal. It just feels like they feel more comfortable on the road, and it's a perfect setup for them. They don't have the pressure, and they can go in and just play their style, like you said earlier, Armand. They just have an incredible way to turn the game into a Red Bull game. And the thing about Orlando that I thought the Red Bulls did a good job of exploiting is that until Lodero came in, Orlando, they have a good forward, they have good wingers similar to the Galaxy, but they didn't have that guy in the center of midfield that could spray the balls around, and there was a gap there. And that is what you're going to see potentially with the Galaxy. If Royce is healthy and Greg Vanney can play him in the middle, I think that would be huge for them. And now I could see the Red Bulls doing a little bit of headhunting to try and maybe get him hurt. But my prediction is going to be 1-0 for the Red Bulls lifting their first MLS
So
Cup.
we're all expecting, I guess, cagey affairs.
Has to be, right?
That's
If
a
it's
word,
wide
I think.
open,
I don't think it's going to be cage. I don't think it's going to be wide open, but I think that speed on the channels that the Galaxy have, even without Puig, I think will still be able to be the determining factor.
in the Liguilla, let's go with semifinal predictions, guys. So as we mentioned, San Luis versus Monterrey, Club America versus Cruz Azul. The first leg of San Luis Monterrey is on Wednesday night. Second leg on Saturday. Club America Cruz Azul Thursday night and Sunday night, both bangers. John, let's start out with you again. Who is going to make it to the Liga MX final? Is the final 2 legs or is it 1 leg?
2 legs.
Finally, 2
Okay.
legs as well. I think it's Cruz Azul's year. I think they're a team of destiny, and them coming back from 3-0 down in the second leg did very little to deter me from that thinking. It's not just a magic thing. Like the defense is so disciplined, despite the fact they gave up 3 goals in the first leg, and despite the fact that I think America is starting to sort of resemble what they looked like in the past 2 seasons. Uh, I still think that Cruz Azul has just been the best team by far in the regular season, and they can make that shown on the field. Martin Anselmi has proven himself to be a very wise manager. I don't think his team is going to feel like the moment is too big for them. Look at their meeting earlier this season, the Estadio Ciudad de los Deportes. Cruz Azul, extremely comfortable. I like them to get through, although I do think it'll be a pretty tight series compared to that blowout that Cruz Azul had earlier this season. I'd kind of like to pick Atletico San
No,
Luis,
I want
just
to
something
also.
different, but at the same time, I think Rayados with all three of their Spaniards and the way that they've been playing defense, the concern is still the goalkeeper for me. They gave up a lot of goals in that second leg, even though they were mostly in control of the series. I still think they'll probably be able to get through, but give me
It's
something crazy like I don't know, like 5-4 on aggregate.
I'll take the next one because yeah, I have to look the exact same way. I think that Club America was able to do it against Toluca. I think it helped them playing in the that knockout round game. I think that there was just like it seemed that there was a what's the word I'm looking for? They were just able to keep it going
There's
versus Toluca.
momentum, right? I
A
mean,
momentum.
look, Xolos
Yeah.
is the same, right?
Yes.
Xolos had only 3 days between that game that they won against Atlas and that first leg. I
That's
thought they were
what
going
you
to be
want in the
exhausted,
playoffs.
but
Right.
Osorio changed guys out, and they were, yeah, we can do it, we can do it, and then they lost that momentum and probably got fatigued too. But yeah, I agree with you that it helped.
And Toluca had what 3 weeks off in between their games with the international break and then the play-ins being played on that weekend. And then Monterrey, yeah, they just have too much star power, man. Like Tecatito, Berterame, Ocampos, Canales. There's so many guys that you have to shut down that by pure talent alone, it would be a great fairy tale. But I'm gonna go with Monterrey as well. So Cruz Azul, Monterrey.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're all going with the same matchup because when I was watching that Cruz Azul Xolos game, look, Cruz Azul basically gave them 3 goals. Like, if you look at the defensive mistakes that they made, it was just uncanny, just bad mistakes. Like, just all of it was terrible. Jorge Sanchez getting sent off, like, just mistake after mistake. It was a really bad
Is
effort.
that the one where I almost kicked him in the face, or was that another game?
No, that was the
That was the game
that was the
before that.
Xolos America game.
Yeah.
Yeah, that uh I see them winning, but I see them winning on their seed, on and them being the higher seed. I see them advancing with that tiebreaker.
That's a good
And
point.
for Monterrey and Atletico San Luis, I think San Luis actually get the first leg victory, but Monterrey comes back and beats them at the return home leg that we see a Monterrey Cruz Azul final in Liga MX.
Will there be more fans, John, at the of Monterrey in the leg in San Luis, or will it be a pretty good home crowd?
No, San Luis, they actually just installed the third biggest video board in Mexico.
Hey,
They've got a good
what
vibe
are
in the
the
stadium, and they're pretty well locally supported. So
what are the
Xolos,
other two?
I think Xolos is the biggest. You've seen that one. I mean, that one is
Yeah, that's a big one.
massive.
Yeah.
Number two, I guess, would be at Rayados Stadium because it's modern and nice. Maybe Chivas, I don't feel like has like one of those big old boards, but they were doing some sort of astronaut situation in the pregame, and like the commentators, you know how it is on a Mexican broadcast. They were kind of like laughing about it, but also being impressed by it. But yeah, the atmosphere in San Luis is usually pretty good, and it's far enough away from a lot of the sort of major cities that you don't have those huge invasions like you do in some of like when Tigres fans would travel to Veracruz or even for some of like Leon games, that kind of thing. There's enough local support that I think it'll be a pretty partisan Atletico San Luis crowd. But again, like you're saying, man, I just think that the talent they have and the Rayados, at some point the cash wins, right? And
Yeah.
they've got cash.
Well, it's going to be fun to watch the Liguilla this weekend, and then of course MLS Cup on Saturday afternoon. And boys, we will be back next week to talk about everything that happened on the Hex. We will catch you next time.